welcome to another episode of Boring History. My name is Angela, and today we're going to be hearing about the life of Daedalus. He's an interesting character because we find mention of him in mythology, the most famous probably being the one of his son, Icarus, who flew too close to the sun and died. However, ancient writers such as Plato and Herodotus seem to treat him as a real-life person. He's also in that show, I think, the one on Netflix, where Jason from Jason and the Argonauts goes and does all the stuff that Theseus is supposed to have done, like kill the Minotaur. Can't remember the name. Daedalus' parentage is disputed, however it's generally agreed that he was some form of Athenian royalty. He worked in Athens and was an extremely famous and skilled smith, as he'd been instructed in the art by the goddess Athena. Now, one of his apprentices was his nephew Talos, who one day happened to pick up the jawbone of a snake and realised that by moving it backwards and forwards he was able to cut a stick in half. This inspired Talos to copy the jawbone in iron, thus inventing the saw. Who would have thought that a snake inspired the invention of a saw? Moving on. This invention, along with others, meant that Talos, at 12 years old, had already surpassed his master. That's gotta hurt. And it didn't sit well with the master smith, because it looked as though Talos' reputation in Athens was soon also going to surpass Daedalus's. This prompted Daedalus to devise a cunning plan. He led Talos up to the roof of Athena's temple on the Acropolis, and just gave him a teensy-weensy little push. He then quickly ran down to the bottom of the Acropolis, hoping to scoop up the body, put it in a sack and dispose of it. But he wasn't sly or quick enough, and unfortunately, his crime ended up getting him banished from Athens. Ostracism was a common form of punishment under the Athenian democratic system, and it meant that they banished you from the city for 10 years. They essentially just made you somebody else's problem. Look at us go, we're learning all sorts of things today. History of the saw, Athenian democratic system. After his banishment from Athens, Daedalus goes to Crete, where he becomes the master architect and sculptor of the king Minos. Now, as we seem to be on a roll with fun facts today, here's another one. Minos had a giant bronze bull, also named Talos, that had been given to him as a gift from Zeus to guard the island of Crete. This bull had been crafted by Hephaestus, who was the smith of the gods, and its job was to run around the island 3 times a day and throw rocks at any ships that got too close. Then, 3 times a year, Talos, the bronze bull, would do a tour of the entire island where he would visit all the small villages, displaying the laws of Minos on bronze tablets. The more you know. Alright, back to Daedalus. He got up to quite a bit of stuff during his visit to Crete. He's the one who helped out Minos' wife, Pasiphae, when she fell in love with a bull, who was actually Poseidon. He created a wooden cow costume that Pasiphae could wear so she and her bull lover could go on romantic moonlit strolls. Now, when these moonlit strolls resulted in the Minotaur, he's also the one who created the Labyrinth. There's also a period where Daedalus is imprisoned in the Labyrinth himself by Minos. And we're given a couple of possible reasons for this imprisonment. Some sources say that Minos found out that Daedalus had assisted Pasiphae in her little cattle liaison, and others say when Theseus came to the island, it was Daedalus who suggested to Ariadne the trick that she would then go on to tell Theseus, which would save his life. And this resulted in both Daedalus and his son Icarus being imprisoned in the labyrinth. So it gets to a point where Daedalus feels as though he's outworn his welcome in Crete, and he begins to devise a plan to escape. He manages this by creating giant feathered wings held together by wax. Now, I'm sure most of you know this part of the story where Icarus doesn't listen to his father, flies too close to the sun, falls into the ocean and drowns. And understandably, this makes Daedalus sad. He flies down into the ocean, scoops up his son's body, and buries him on a pretty little island. Daedalus then continues westward until he arrives somewhere near Naples. When he arrives in Naples, he ends up dedicating his wings to the god Apollo and builds him a giant temple with a golden roof. I'm not sure where he finds the gold, but I guess technicalities aren't that important. Daedalus then continues on to Sicily, where he's welcomed by King Cocalus. Yes, we'll go with that. Sounds Italian. Cocalus ends up being a great fan of Daedalus's because he begins erecting all these beautiful buildings once again. Now, if you think that King Minos is just going to let sleeping minotaurs lie and forget about Daedalus's escape, you would be wrong. King Minos decides to be sneaky, and he sends a message to all the kings. All of them. And he announces that he has a puzzle for them to solve, and whoever can solve this puzzle will be richly rewarded. The puzzle was to pass a linen thread through a conch shell. That's the twirly ones. I don't have one. Now, this had been a very carefully selected puzzle because it was one that King Minos thought only Daedalus would be able to solve. Cocalus didn't know about Daedalus's past run-in with Minos, and instead he saw this as a great opportunity to gain some prestige for his little kingdom. Crete was pretty powerful at the time. So Cocalus is all excited and he goes up to Daedalus like, hey, can you help me solve this puzzle? And Daedalus is like, yeah, sure, no worries, just give me a second. And he bores a hole through the pointy end of the shell, ties a string around an ant. Remember, we don't care about technicalities. He then covers the hole in honey to tempt the ant, and voila, the ant runs through the hole, thus passing the linen thread through the conch shell. Cocalus is super happy and quickly sends a messenger to Minos, letting him know that they've solved his puzzle, not realizing that he's just revealed the location of Daedalus' secret hideaway. Minos sails to Sicily and demands that Cocalus hands over Daedalus. However, Cocalus' daughters had really been loving the toys that Daedalus had been making for them, and they're all like, Daddy, you can't hand over our toy maker. And Cocalus is all like, of course not, my sweets. And together with Daedalus, they devise another cunning plan to rid themselves of the irksome Minos. Daedalus leads a pipe through the roof of the bathroom, and when Minos is having a nice, relaxing bubble bath, they quickly pour boiling water down the pipe and cook the king. They then return his corpse to the Cretans, saying that Minos had very foolishly tripped on a rug and fallen into a cauldron of boiling water. It wasn't their fault, he had cooked himself. But don't feel too bad for Minos, because Zeus ends up making him one of the judges of the underworld that gets to judge the dead. Hey, another random fact! As for Daedalus, he ends up crafting a few more buildings for Cocalus in thanks, until eventually he meets up with Iolaus, who, as we know from the 12 Labours video, is the nephew of Hercules, or Herakles. Together they go to Sardinia, where they live happily ever after. The end. Did you like all our random little facts? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you'll subscribe, because I look forward to sharing even more boring history with you in the future.